views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening. Welcome to Bronxtalk. Tonight's show is going to be a lot lighter than some of the very serious issues we've been dealing with on the program. A young man who grew up in the Bronx has launched his career as a journalist and now has the very fascinating job as senior editor at Rolling Stone magazine. In that position, he's written dozens of record reviews, CD reviews, if you will, and articles about the music business and rock and roll in particular. He's also had the good fortune to have interviewed a number of well-known stars, including Paul McCartney, Rivers Cuomo of Weezer, and many others. So tonight we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about all of that with him and get some first-hand insight into the magazine business, the music business, and the rock and roll world traveled by one of our own. We're on tape tonight, no phone calls, but you can email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on the Bronxtalk Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. But for the here and now, senior editor at Rolling Stone magazine, Simon Vosik-Levinson, nice to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
You know, one of the things that occurred to me looking at the calendar is that tonight is December 8th, and for those of us, and I have to include myself, who are rock and roll fans and music fans and even cultural fans, would know that's the night that John Lennon was shot dead at the age of 40. And in fact, it was a Monday night, which we were just talking beforehand. It was Monday Night Football, so we know it was a Monday night. So this really is an anniversary. Let's see, it's a 44th anniversary, 34th anniversary of his death. Just before we get into you and your career and everything else, talk about the impact of losing John Lennon at the age of 40, 34 years ago.
Well, it's such a tragic event, and one whose impact you can almost not measure. Because someone like John Lennon, you look at what he did with the first 40 years of his life, and you wonder what he would have done with another 30 or 40 years. It's inestimable. I mean, this is one of the most important songwriters in music history. This is an incredibly charismatic figure who is moving towards sort of new ground and new territory in his art after taking a few years off from making music. So he was taken away from us at really inopportune and sad time, and it's a terrible tragedy. Do
you ever wonder? I mean, now you're much younger than I, but I grew up with him. You learned about him. You ever wonder what kinds of things he might have done or would have said? Or I guess he was ahead of all of us every step of the way, so it may be hard to imagine. What a strange word to use. I use the word imagine.
Yeah, you have to wonder. I mean, he was such an eloquent voice for peace, for understanding. He was also just an eloquent poet of the human condition, and it's hard to imagine what he would have done, but it would have been something worth hearing for sure. For sure,
which I guess starts to get us into the conversation about you, and so I mean, I grew up, and your parents, who I know because they grew up in the Bronx as well. I grew up with this music, and so it was always part of my life, and many people don't know my own career. I was in the music business for many years, about 15 years. I was a radio DJ before I got into this. And so I grew up with it, and it was second nature to me to know about John Lennon or the Beatles or Crosby, Stills and Nash or Santana or whomever you want to name. For you growing up, how did you get interested in it, and why did you get interested in it to a point that you would dedicate your professional career to it?
Yeah, well, both of my parents are big music fans, and whether it's for that reason or for another reason, from an early age, I've always had just a deep love of music and a real interest in music. I can't play music, but I love listening to music, thinking about music, talking about it. And so, initially I was exposed to music from earlier generations by my parents. I got really into that stuff at the same time as I was getting into newer music, when I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s. And I've never really seen a contradiction between that. Maybe I'm weird, but, I love listening to all kinds of music from all time periods. There's interesting stuff from, wherever you look.
Many people, they ask me, and when I talk with friends or others about the nature of music and the nature of current music versus music from maybe when I grew up, or even the various years in between. Do you compare eras? Do you say, well, I mean, you're a younger man, and so you say, well, this is my era of music? Or do you look at, the stars have gone before and say to yourself, well, gee, this was the golden age, these were the golden times? I mean, how do you view kind of the spectrum of rock and roll started in the 50s and up till now?
Yeah, so I would say it's always a golden age somewhere for someone. It sort of really depends on your perspective. So nostalgia has a lot to do with it. When I think about the music that was made in the 1990s when I was a teenager, I think of the hip hop from that era or the alt rock from then. I love that stuff, and it seems to me like it was really special and unique. But at the same time, I can also look at the music made in the 60s or the 70s and see how that was also really groundbreaking, trailblazing music. And the truth is I can listen to new music now and see really fascinating, amazing stuff happening.
I've had this conversation with many people, and they get mad at me for it, actually, because, I feel like as the rock stars of my generation get older, someone like Eric Clapton or, Stephen Stills or Neil Young or Aretha Franklin, people that I grew up with, and I see them age, and listen, life, we know what life is about. It's inevitable. They will not be with us at some point. I feel like those people can never be replaced. And people say to you, have some nerve to say that, that's you in your generation, but in our generation, how do you view that? I mean, someone like Eric Clapton, a one-of-a-kind talent, I feel like there'd be nobody. You can't say that Jack White is going to step in his shoes,
I would agree with that statement.
You would? Yeah.
I don't think that you can replace, Clapton or a Bob Dylan or a Paul McCartney. They did something that was unique, but at the same time, I think there are equivalently unique and trailblazing artists now. I don't think you can replace Kanye West either. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a fair analogy. Do you see a lot of music? Do you go to a lot of shows?
I do.
Or you do?
Yeah.
And I guess that's one of the great perks of the business.
It is a great perk. I go to tons of shows, usually at least one show a week. Sometimes go to as many as 3 or 4 shows a week, which can get exhausting, but is also really, really fun.
3 or 4 shows a week.
That's on a big week, yeah.
And that's because you and Rolling Stone. Of course, it started in San Francisco, right, in California.
Yeah, it started in San Francisco in 1967, then moved a little while after that. The offices moved to New York, and they've been here for decades now.
You don't get tired of it?
I've never gotten tired of it. Some people do. I know people who work for music journalists as years and then eventually sort of grew out of it. I love it. It's the best job in the world.
So you studied, I went through your bio, and you studied as a journalist. You went to Harvard, as a matter of fact. And,
yeah.
And what got you to say, you know what, I want to do this for a living, as opposed to, well, listen, I'm a really big music fan and I love music. Well, what got you to do that?
It was an interesting process. I certainly, when I started, studying journalism and pursuing journalism, I didn't think I would be a music journalist. I knew that I was this sort of obsessive music fan, but I thought of that as more of a leisure activity. But as time went by, I had friends who were writing about music and the arts, and I saw that was an option. So I thought I would try it out. Realized it would be fun. It was really fun. Started going to lots of shows, and not just going to the shows, but getting paid to go to the shows. And
boy, yeah.
That was pretty cool. After graduating, I tried to see if I could get an internship at an entertainment publication, which I was able to do, and sort of just took it from there.
Wow. There are a number of things that I want to ask about Rolling Stone magazine, and I've been a reader for my whole life, really, practically since the first edition. You've written a number of, I call them record reviews. Do we still call them record reviews?
Sure. We actually do still call them record reviews. I think reviews. We're the only people who still do.
Oh, okay. There you go. Is there a policy on that, or you're a senior editor, so maybe you can make your own choices? How does that work? And then I'm always interested in the scale, because sometimes, I don't know, I may like something a lot better than you guys do, or I may think something that is just garbage, and there it's got 4 or 5 stars.
Right. So I actually edit the record reviews section.
Oh, so I'm talking to the right guy.
This is my home territory. It's an interesting process. I mean, when I figure out what records we're going to review, I try to balance things that are big and popular and are going to sell with things that are just interesting and good. Yeah. So try to get a good balance.
Taylor Swift is getting reviewed whether we like it or not.
Definitely getting reviewed for sure. But I try to mix it up with some sort of new emerging artists too, because that's interesting to readers, I think, and the artists deserve it. And then in terms of the ratings, that's a very interesting question. I try to assign albums to critics who at least have a chance of liking the album. I'm not going to assign something to someone who I know is going to hate it.
And these are a group of critics who and already paid for by the magazine, or do you use freelancers?
Both. We have a relatively small pool of writers. Some of them are on staff. Some of them are freelancers or contract writers, and I have ongoing relationships with them.
And so you assign it to them, and then do you give the stars? So you're the guy we blame, or do each writer writes their review and then tells you what they think?
You can blame me.
There we go.
Writers do give their own star ratings to their albums, but we have a disclaimer printed where it says that star ratings are done sort of at the discretion of the editorial staff. So there's sort of a hand overseeing everything.
And is there anything in there? Boy, this is my real kind of journalism here. Is there anything in there other than how you or others perceive the quality of the music? In other words, like, if someone like Elton John comes out with something, you're just not going to give him 2 stars, even if you think the thing is garbage, because he's Elton John and there's people out there that are going to buy it and like it.
Well, there's institutional taste. Rolling Stone has been around for decades, and they're artists who we've been behind for a long time. So the assumption is that we're interested in their work. And you're right that if Elton John or Bruce Springsteen puts out an album, we're not going to give it 1 or 2 stars. Probably because it's not going to be that bad. It's never going to be actually that bad, but also because it's an artist who we've been behind.
Let's talk about the music business. Now, a number of years ago, and I've been doing this show for many years, as you know, as the music business was changing, it was Bronxite Willie Colon who was on the show, and we were talking about, he was into politics at that time, and that was part of the discussion. But we did talk about music, and we were talking about how vinyl was now turning into CDs, which of course became the digital age. And and there was a lot of panic, and if you read Rolling Stone at that time, there was a lot of panic that, you know what, we're not making what we used to make. We used to be able to charge $17.99 as an album or whatever it was, and now all of a sudden, we have to change the whole economy. And then there was a period of time that concerts were also not selling out. There was a lot of concern about the summer, a tour circuit and all that. What is the health of the music business right now? Have they been able to kind of balance things out so the industry is maybe different from what it was, but strong?
Well, the pie has gotten a lot smaller.
Smaller.
Yeah, the music industry basically peaked in terms of revenue in the late 90s and very early 2000s, and then had a really disastrous cratering drop after the internet came in with Napster, file sharing. It became easier for people to download music for free, or you could say steal it.
That was a large part of it.
That was, the industry took a big hit, and it's never really recovered from that. At the same time, I think that there were a few years in there where people in the music industry were just kind of despairing. I think now things have, evened out a little bit.
And what has contributed to that? Because of, let's say, iTunes?
Right, so iTunes helped. I think, labels have gotten smarter about selling their music online. In some cases, they've cut deals with streaming services like Spotify and gotten revenue that way. It's still an ongoing problem. You'll hear artists who think that streaming, which is sort of the wave of the future, isn't compensating them enough. Taylor Swift just refused to put any of her music on Spotify for that reason. So it's definitely,
she feels like it's giving it away.
She thinks she's getting ripped off. Yeah. So it's a raging debate for sure.
I, as a consumer and a music fan, which I have been for many years, I've always watched the prices of things. So you used to, as I said, $17.99 for a CD and $18.99, and then, if you wanted to buy, something like a Beatles CD was $16.99. But now you could go on iTunes, not only download a couple of songs for $1.99 or $1.29 or 99 cents in some cases, but you could get the whole album for $7.99 or $8.99.
Right.
That's what you meant by the pie is smaller.
Right, exactly. And just, overall sales have gone down. You don't have to buy an entire record if you don't want to anymore. You can just buy 1 or 2 songs that you like, or you can just listen to them on YouTube. You don't actually have to pay money for it if you don't want to.
Don't I know it?
Yeah.
I mean, and it really, as a music fan, it's a wonderful thing, because, if you like, even an artist you like, and they have a song, an album or a CD with 10 or 12 songs, you may like 6.
Right.
That's still $6 is a lot different than spending the $12.99. Let's talk about some of the interesting people that you interviewed. Of course, the one at the top of the list has to be Paul McCartney.
Yes.
That must have been an unbelievable. Now, I understand it wasn't face to face, and it says in the article that it was a phone call.
That's right. It was a phone call.
Talk about it.
This has actually happened to me twice, which is pretty mind blowing. That I've had two conversations with Paul McCartney.
Hello, Paul.
Yes. I'll tell you. The most recent one was this summer. I went up up to Albany to see a show that he played. It was the first show he played after he had taken a couple months off because he was sick. So it was this big return to the stage. I saw the show. It was a great show. The next morning, I'm in my hotel room, and my phone rings. He goes, "Hello, Simon."
Really? It was just like that?
He just called himself. And normally when you talk to an artist of that level, there's a publicist or a manager connecting the call. He just called me directly.
And he knew you because he had done the previous interview.
Right, and I have a relationship with his publicity team and his management.
And so what was on his mind that he wanted to call you specifically? He knew you were at that show?
Yeah, well, so I had set up the interview through his publicist. I had said, we know this is a big show for him, and we want to talk to him about it. And so they, put the request through to him, and he decided, he turns down lots of requests, but in this case, he had something he wanted to get off his chest. He wanted to talk, so he agreed to do the interview, and he called me.
I know we have some graphics, so if folks want to put up, we pulled clips off. There's a picture of the interview you did with Paul McCartney. Is there stuff that he said that's not, other than hello and how are you, that's not in there that we would be interested in knowing?
The vast majority of anything that people would be interested in went into the online version. There were 2 versions of that story, but the one that was published online has pretty much everything.
For you, and let's go back to the first one, what was that like, even just thinking that actually is Paul McCartney on the other end of the line?
That was one of the most surreal, in a good way, experiences I've ever had. In that case, I went out to Seattle with my wife to visit some friends of ours who lived there. It so happened that Paul McCartney was playing a show that night. I went to see it because I was in town. At the end of that show, he brought out the surviving members of Nirvana and reunited them. This was the first time they'd done this in many years, to play a couple of songs with him. That was pretty cool, and I put in a request. I said, "Hey, does he want to talk about this?" Next day, next thing I know, I'm at staying at our friend's house, sitting at their kitchen table, and my phone rang, and there you go, it was Paul.
And it was Paul himself.
It was him.
And did you tell your friends, hey, excuse me, I have Paul McCartney on the line?
Yeah, well, so my wife and my friends sort of gathered, they were sitting behind me, and I had to put them on speakerphone because I didn't even have a microphone to connect to it. So I put them on speaker, and they're sitting there listening to the entire conversation, trying not to,
not to freak out.
Yeah.
And again, anything that you take from that, or just an analysis of what it was like, or what he said, other than what was printed, because we can all look it up online and see what it was like.
Yeah, I'll say it was a really fun experience for me, because a lot of stars, especially people who have been in the music industry for as long as Paul McCartney has, who are as famous as he has, they sort of develop a shell. They're difficult to talk to. They're maybe reluctant to answer questions. Paul McCartney,
I know that on a different level for different reasons, but go ahead.
But he was loving it. He was happy to talk. There was that first one. In the second time, I'd prepared enough questions to last us maybe half an hour. We ended up talking for a full hour because he just wanted to keep talking. He was into the conversation, and that's a real treat for a journalist.
We talked about John. Let's talk about Paul. To me, he's just a remarkable fountain of who he is. He wants to continue to be this.
Yes.
So many people who've been around for so long. I've had it. I've done it enough. Don't bother me. I get the fame. I get the whole thing. He still likes being Paul McCartney.
He loves being Paul McCartney. He loves performing. I think it's really notable that, at his stage in his career, he still loves going out there.
Yes?
Yes, right. And he still loves going out there, touring wherever it is. If it's a big city or a small town, he gives the same, energy everywhere he goes. And that's something you don't see in a lot of artists.
Interviews for what you do with what I do, people sit in that seat, and that's how I do them. But I guess what you did with Weezer and with Rivers Cuomo was a little more personal. You went to visit. Talk to me about some of the unusual circumstances that you and some of your colleagues get into when you conduct these interviews.
Sure. So, if you're reporting a feature, you really want to sort of embed yourself into the subject's world. So it's not just a phone conversation. The interview portion might happen just sitting face-to-face over lunch or something, but even that is only part of what you're doing as a reporter. You're trying to, sort of shadow them, play fly on the wall, see what they're like in their element, almost as if you're not there. And when I reported that Weezer story, I went into a studio where they were recording their album. I watched them sort of argue about, different decisions that, to make in the recording process, which can be a tense process. I sort of, really got a sense of what their dynamic is like. And there are lots of other examples.
Are they welcoming to you, or do they see it as a necessary evil? You know, and listen, we want to be on our own, but we know we have to do it because we need the publicity. We bring Rolling Stone in or something.
You know, it varies. Most artists at least make an effort to be friendly, but the truth is, if you see it from their perspective, it's
pretend to be friendly. I get that too.
If you see it from their perspective, it's some stranger they've never met before wants to hang out while they're doing something pretty important. You know, making a record is what they do, and just sort of like hang out there quietly in the corner. You can see why it might make an artist uncomfortable. So I think part of being a professional artist is, you know, getting used to that and learning to give journalists what they need without giving too much away.
Did you ever, I don't even know if you're going to say this, but did you ever sit there and see something that you feel like, gee whiz, I probably shouldn't have just seen that? Like a couple of people in the band fighting with each other or walking out, or, you know.
There have been times where I've seen that, not in that particular story, but there have been times.
And you want to tell us who it is?
I'm not on the air. Yeah.
But so you've seen stuff like that.
Sure, you definitely see, you know, sometimes what you want as a journalist, you almost want the artist to forget you're there, but then sometimes they'll end up, you know, doing stuff or saying stuff that you kind of know they don't really want you to see.
Many of our regular viewers would be interested also in the time you spent with Michael Bloomberg. And when he was mayor, he certainly never, you know, Dinkins was here, Rudy was here, Michael Bloomberg was never here. Mm-hmm. There was no point to even invite him because, of course, he would never have even bothered. So that was pretty unique, almost as unique as, you know, getting Paul McCartney, is that you actually had to sit down with Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah, you know, Bloomberg had a notoriously kind of frosty relationship with the press and with the people that he served in the city. But in this case, you know, he had already retired as mayor, and we were doing a big package on gun control, which is one of his signature issues that he really wants to get out there and talk about. So I was surprised that he agreed to the interview, but he did. I went to the office of his philanthropic effort, his foundation, the Bloomberg Foundation, sat there in a room with him and a group of several advisors, which is kind of funny. When you talk to musicians, usually just you and the artist. In this case, he had a few handlers.
His team of lawyers. Did they interject at all?
You know, they tried to a couple of times, but Bloomberg is very sure of his own opinions, you could say. So when they would try to sort of like stop him or shush him, he would wave them off and just keep going. You can't stop that guy.
So then why did he have them in the room? I don't even.
I think, yeah, hard to say. Yeah.
And you were pleased with how it went out? He received you with respect and all that kind of stuff?
Sure, with some respect, yeah. It was a really interesting conversation that we had about gun control. He is an eloquent advocate for that. The most interesting part of the conversation for me was when I asked him about the widespread criticism of his stop and frisk policy, which at that time had been, you know, widely denounced. His successor, Bill de Blasio, had been elected in large part by denouncing stop and frisk. A federal judge had ruled that stop and frisk, as practiced, was unconstitutional.
And yet, so you interviewed him. This was after he had been in office,
right? It was early. It was this February or March. Yeah. So he had just left office maybe a few weeks earlier, and so I found, yet despite all of that, he was completely defiant and unapologetic. Despite, you know, all of the masses of evidence that showed that stop and frisk was a failed policy that targeted the wrong people, none of that impacted him. He just defended it to the end. You
know, as somebody who's covered the city and handled a lot of these issues. That, of course, doesn't surprise me. That characterizes really what Michael Bloomberg is about.
Yes.
Just to kind of conclude this, I want to talk. We talked about the music business, but the magazine business has undergone a number of changes as well, and necessary adjustments because of the digital age. People were reading fewer magazines. They certainly were buying them fewer on the newsstand, which of course affects the bottom line. But then, of course, what else affects the bottom line? The fact that advertisers will say, well, wait a minute, if they're not picking it up. So where is the magazine business at, and what have you had to do to survive the transition into this digital age where it's available on my phone? I could read it.
Right. So, you know, this is a problem that everyone in the magazine business has faced over the last, 10 or 15 years. We've faced it too. It's been difficult. It's been a challenge. At Rolling Stone, the approach has been to just try to keep the magazine as good as it can be, keep the magazine a unique and special thing that you can't get elsewhere. At the same time, we have taken great strides towards putting a lot of our content online, different content, some of the same content from the magazine, but some dedicated content that's written for the web. And I think we've succeeded in building a real audience there.
Well, one of the things that I do like, and I'm a subscriber, as I said, is a lot of those in studio or in Rolling Stone music concerts. You do like little acoustic things. Those are extraordinary. What about converting the content to digital? Now, one of the things I noticed at Rolling Stone is, at least as I understand, is still you have to pay to read it online. Now, for example, my Sports Illustrated subscription, I can read for free as a subscriber. Rolling Stone hasn't gone there.
Yeah, that's a complicated question that everyone in journalism, magazines, and newspapers, everyone's
wrestling with.
Everyone figures out their own solution to it. Right now, the current status is that if you subscribe to Rolling Stone in print, you get free access to the entire magazine online. Otherwise, you just get what's posted on the website, which is a different slice of it.
So that's and that's the way it is for the moment.
Yes.
To conclude, people have asked me all the time, who's the one Bronx guest that you want to have, and I haven't had. And the one I want to get is Dion DiMucci of Dion and the Belmonts.
Yeah.
So if you ever get to talk to him, I want you to make sure that he comes on Bronx Talk. But I'll ask you the same question. I mean, you've already had Paul McCartney. Are there artists or people that really intrigue you that so far have been a little bit distant that you'd like to sit down with or get a chance to talk to?
That is a good question. Something I think about all the time. I mean,
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. I mean, and I've interviewed many of the top stars today. I've interviewed Jay-Z and Beyonce and Kanye West and many very famous people. I've interviewed lots of artists from earlier generations. As we mentioned, I talked to Paul McCartney. I've never talked to Bob Dylan. I'd love to do that. That's a real white whale. I mean, Dylan doesn't do a lot of interviews, and when he does, he's pretty combative with reporters. So.
Or, I don't even, I've seen the interviews I've seen. I don't know if he's combative or he just believes he's kind of on a different plane or something.
Right, he's playing his own game.
As opposed to, hey, it's Paul, you're not going to get, hey, it's Bobby.
No, very, very different approach. But, even for that reason, it kind of makes it a challenge and something I'd love to do.
But you have writers who kind of specialize, who have relationships. David Frick has a relationship with a number of the, is he?
Sure.
So, I guess maybe as a senior editor, you'd say, hey, I'd like to do that. But some of those guys probably are going to say, listen, it's just logical for me to handle it.
Right, well, sure. There are writers like David Frick who are some of our, longest standing writers, so they certainly get first choice on many assignments.
New groups that you're excited about that everybody should listen to?
Oh, wow, there are lots of them.
There's probably more than you can mention here.
If I was going to recommend one, people should check out St. Vincent.
St. Vincent.
I don't know if you've heard it. It's one artist. She's a woman.
Okay.
She writes these sort of great, sort of twisted art rock songs.
And is it out there yet?
Yes, she's made a few albums. She put out an album this year that was fantastic.
Honey, queue up my iTunes. Look, search for St. Vincent. Gary's going to check that out. Simon Vozik Levinson, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for giving us a little insight, and good luck out there in the rock and roll world. We will be reading you more and more in Rolling Stone, and all the Bronxites will be doing that. And onward and upward. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show, or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. You can become a fan of Bronx Talk on Facebook, and I wish you would. You can see the archives of our program. You can watch any of our old shows at bronxnet.org, and you check out the Bronx Talk link on the bottom right navigation bar. 2 shows upcoming I want you to know about. Next week, we're going to get right back into the thick of it. We're going to talk about all the legal issues surrounding the grand jury's decision regarding the Eric Garner case. And then the week after, on the 22nd, we'll do Bronx authors. We already did a Bronx magazine writer, but Bronx authors with new books written by Bronxites right on time for the holiday buying season. That'll be on the 22nd. Okay? We'll see you then, and thanks to producer Dolly Gonzalez, director Bianca Ortiz. We'll see you next week. Good night.